Come on. Hi. Hi. It's always one too many. Yeah, so my name is Michael. That's Michael. There it is. So it's interesting that I'm coming after a guy talking about manufacturing physical parts, because it's like, you know, none of you guys were seeing him make the shoe and questioning whether or not the shoe was in fact real and like possible to make. He obviously made it in a really dope way, but you guys, it was very obvious that he was making the shoe. And I think that inspiration can be viewed as an equally manufacturable thing as a physical object. And now, let's go to the next slide. So, I believe that inspiration should be a basic human right. And I believe that, next slide, the next slide, the slide before that, yes, and that the World's Fair is the best place. Oh, Alan, it's okay if they see you, I think. And that the World's Fair is the best place to exercise that right. And so my story, or this story, started 5 years ago when I had much longer hair, kind of like yours, very nice, by the way, I saw it. When I read a book called The Devil in the White City, which is about the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. And in that book, it was the first time I encountered the idea of a World's Fair. And I learned that in 1893, 27 million people, which was 42% of the entire US population, there was only 63 million of us in this little country at the time. Now there are closer to 350 million. 42% traveled to go to this event in Chicago via train and horse and buggy. Cars didn't exist yet. And when they got there, they got to see electricity for the first time, very much like you see in this picture, thanks to some guy named Nikola Tesla running around the fairgrounds plugging 100,000 light bulbs in. And they got to ride in the world's first Ferris wheel, which was made by a guy named George Ferris. Crazy, right? You would just think Ferris wheel, it's this iconic thing. A freaking guy with a weird mustache made it. And I was just blown away by these things, by what these people got to experience at this fair. And so then I started learning more about World's Fairs. And I learned that in 1889 at the World's Fair in Paris, a guy named Gustave built a thing called the Eiffel Tower as the entryway into that World's Fair. It was kind of like, you know, the world's most epic door. And then at the 1876 World's Fair in Philadelphia, a guy named Alex Graham Bell, he made this brand new spanking awesome phone. It's like an iPhone right there. And people got to see it for the first time at the World's Fair. In 1962 at the Seattle World's Fair, it was the Space Needle. There we go, we got a Seattleite? I guess you don't know either. And in Knoxville at the 1982 World's Fair, it was the world's first touchscreen. And I could do this forever. I obviously won't because I've learned people don't like it. But it just blew my mind. Every time a World's Fair happened, the future came with it. And that is just crazy. And so then I wanted to actually talk to people who had been to a World's Fair and see, you know, is this thing real? Like, are there real people who went to a fair and can tell me about it? So I ran around Washington Square Park in New York, where I live, for, I think, 2 weekends it took me to actually find the people. And I just approached, I was profiling, and I approached older-looking folks, and I asked them if they had ever been to a World's Fair. Some people were weirded out. Some people were like, yeah, I have. And then they actually told me their stories. And so here are some of their stories.
I put on 20 pounds. Yeah, that's what I was trying to think of, Belgian waffles.
Belgian waffles.
Well, it was like stepping into another world. It was like getting out of wherever you were and your life and everything, and going over there, which was wonderful, and the future and promising and big and different and exciting.
When you walked into the fair, the first thing that you confront was the architecture.
I think it was called, the symbol of it was the Trilon and the Perisphere. It was a circular ball and then a three-sided tower that rose up beside it.
That globe made such an impression on me. I just thought it was beautiful, and when I was a kid, it was so big. That was the thing that blew me away, was the architecture.
It was the science, it was the different countries, the different cultures.
It's not just about the sex appeal of technology itself. It's about how it can change it for human beings.
Oh yeah, of course. Everything about it was cool. I mean, they had this empty park, and all of a sudden this thing appeared there. You know,
It's the wildly different buildings that were there, and it was this wonderful blast and cacophony of styles.
If you got involved in the vastness of it, you would get lost.
The thing I remember of that was the GM Motorama, in which you could look down at cars going all around, and these cars of the future.
well, today it seems to me that there is so much material for a World's Fair.
The World's Fair, and I think I've mentioned this before, is about hope. It was about hope for me, for the future, and the possibility of what man and women can do.
And everyone has an exposition of exactly what they want to show, but altogether, it is the future.
You know, when else are you going to get an opportunity to see the entire world come together over a single idea?
Well, it's a big deal. It's exciting. I mean, you know, it's obvious to me.
It was definitely worth going, and anytime that there is a World's Fair, I'm going to go.
Can't stay away from the World's Fair.
If they had another one, I would probably go again.
My name is Kathy Von Hart.
I'm Paul Engel.
I'm Elisa Rollo Bennett.
I went to the 1939 World's Fair.
When I was 11 years old.
When I was 6 years old,
I'm Doris Deether, and I went to the World's Fair in 1964. For 2 weeks.
If you guys have seen Interstellar, the style was off of the Interstellar interviews. So I learned about World's Fairs. I talked to these people, and it became obvious to me that people go to the World's Fair to find inspiration. One interesting story is about a guy named Milton Hershey. You may recognize his last name. He was a caramel maker in Pennsylvania in 1893, and he went to the World's Fair by either train or horse and buggy in Chicago. And as the story goes, when he got there, he stood in front of the German pavilion for hours, transfixed by a chocolate making machine that the Germans had brought over from Germany. And he left the fair right away. He sold his caramel business, and he bought himself a chocolate machine, because that was the goddamn future for Milton. And then he made Hershey's chocolate, and as it turns out, he was right. And so I've learned all this, and then I saw people like what happened to Milton, the impression World's Fairs made on those old people that I met in the park. And then I started thinking about this byproduct of the fair that is inspiration. And I realized that today, we think inspiration is a cliche. It is this abstract, intangible thing that we don't take seriously like we do a speaker like that. And, you know, inspiration, right now, for me growing up, it's dream as if you'll live forever, live as if you'll die today. It's what doesn't kill you only makes you stronger. Shoot for the moon. Even if you miss, you'll land among the. Just do it. We all know these things, and they're cliche. They're very nice, but they don't give you a blueprint for how to go about living an inspired life. When I was a little kid, however old I was there, I was given blueprints for a number of things. How to brush my teeth, which I could obviously do very well, I was given a blueprint for. How to tie my shoes, which I can obviously do very well, I was given a blueprint for. But I wasn't given a blueprint for how to live an inspired life. And I don't think that is any fault of my parents, of my teachers, my friends, my coaches. I think we simply haven't evolved to the point where we view this idea of inspiration as something that can be attained through a consistent, reproducible way. And so then, I wanted to figure out, how do you do it? How do you actually manufacture inspiration? And so I started looking into the science of inspiration, which, believe it or not, actually is a very small field of study. And so I found these two scientists who, about 10 years ago, conducted a very awesome study. And they asked the question, is inspiration a real identifiable thing that happens to our brains, is the last word there. And they talked to thousands of people, and they found some very interesting things. They found that the frequency of inspiration actually predicts the number of patents a person holds. And they found many, many other correlations between people who reported more episodes of inspiration and many, many other positive factors like the effort you put forth in your life, your happiness, your relationships. And they concluded that there is, in fact, a scientific observable difference between a person who is inspired and a person who is not. And when I read that and learned that, it made me think, damn, what am I? And you're sitting here now. What are you? Where do you fall in this spectrum of inspiration? Are you inspired? Are you not? And no matter where you fall on it, the beauty is that it doesn't really matter, because if we are able to observe where you fall, that also means that we can manipulate the level of inspiration that we have. If we can observe something, we can affect it. So now, how do we actually make inspiration? So the word inspiration, inspire, comes from Latin, like I think everything. And in, means into, and spirare means breathe. I was not a Latin major. So literally, inspire means to breathe. It means, that's inspire. And then figuratively, which is the one that I talk about, is a breathing in of some idea or purpose into the mind. And so, I am going to attempt to convince you that they're actually the exact same thing. We can breathe ideas into our mind as methodically as we breathe oxygen into our lungs. For example, we're in this room, and let's say the oxygen just totally disappeared. What would you do? You'd freak out. You would literally freak out, and because you'd be like, I can't breathe. And would you sit there and just be like, gosh, I sure hope the oxygen comes back? No. You would start running around. You'd probably run outside, because that'd be smart, but you'd go somewhere else until you found oxygen so that you could breathe. And to me, breathing in an idea into the mind, which is like oxygen for the soul, should be just as urgent of a desire as to breathe physically. And the beauty is that you can find this, currently abstract form of inspiration just as easily as oxygen by simply changing what's around you. Just change what's around you. That is the blueprint to find inspiration. Are you inspired? I don't know. Change what's around you. It's like going shopping. If you want something, let's say it's cereal, let's say it's a new pair of 3D printed shoes, are you just going to sit there and hope the thing comes to you? No, you have to actually commit an action. You have to change something in order to get it. You have to go to the store, you at least have to pick up Seamless until you can actually get the thing. And finding inspiration is no different. You have to change what's around you, change a variable in order to find it. And to me, the World's Fair is this ultimate supermarket of inspiration. It's this place that lasts for 6 months. The best of what humankind can do is on display for everybody to see, and the probability that you find an idea that you can pluck off the shelf to inspire you at this place, at a place like this, is just so much higher than if you are, I don't know, sitting at home. So here's a photo of our last World's Fair we did in San Francisco, and it's interesting. So, you might look at this photo and see some kids playing, a guy on a skateboard. I look at this photo and I look right at the kid who's like staring at the smoke, and I see a person who's shopping. He's shopping for inspiration. He doesn't know it, but he actually is. And I haven't followed up with this kid, but it's possible that because he got to see this cool toy rocket thing at this event, he's now set down an inspired path to become the first human to land on Mars. And I don't know if that's true, but I do know that had he not had the opportunity to breathe an idea into his mind related to space, he would never be inspired to become an astronaut. And it's funny because none of us would argue that this kid has the basic human rights to food, water, and shelter. But I'm here to argue that he also has the basic human right to inspiration. Thank you.
Woo! Thank you, Mike.